Well, Tony Smith is the former boss of Border Force, an international consultant on borders. Tony, we've heard a lot about nurses' strikes and rail strikes. We haven't heard much about Border Force strikes. Are these at Gatwick and Heathrow, or will this affect Dover too?
So they've announced selective ports of entry, Nigel, where they're going to strike. They're not striking at every single port. I think the objective of the unions is to cause maximum disruption to travelling public, long queues at passport controls. So one of the unions has actually announced a strike. That's the Public and Commercial Services Union. There is another union, Nigel, called the Immigration Service Union, and I was there when they set that up, actually, which has a rather different philosophy, which is they're not prepared to walk away from the border completely. Because there are checks that are done still now at our ports, even on the boats. There are checks done because we have to do checks and screening on people. And it would, I think, be fundamentally wrong for an officer from the Border Force to walk away from that duty. So I am hopeful that the ports will still be covered. I'm sorry for those passengers that are going to be delayed. That would be their strategy, though, is to actually more like work to rule, check the passports very closely, make sure that really is you, that your photograph has it. These are all things that they're entitled to do. But of course, they want to facilitate as well. But I'm really hopeful they don't all go on strike, Nigel, because that would be a retrograde step, in my opinion.
And it's about pay, of course, as all these strikes are.
Well, all the public service is the same in the same position, and so I can understand why.
Yes.
You know, they want to make a point, the same as other public servants. But I think there's a real sense of duty about protecting us and protecting the border in the Border Force, and I think they owe us that at least.
Good. Now, as I say, I've been away for a week. Nothing changes other than the Home Office become more and more desperate to find accommodation as hotels are filling up. We don't know the number, but it's well over 300 now hotels that are filled up around the country. The Albanian question. I mean, I think this has changed the nature of the debate. You know, prior to July, the big argument was, well, maybe, Nigel, they could be legitimate refugees, to which I'd respond, well, why are they all young men? But now there are people coming from this safe country of Albania. It appears, Tony, we're doing nothing. What could we do?
So I think you're right in that what we call the cohorts, or the complexion of the people on the boats, has changed significantly this year. We heard from Commander Dana Mahani at the Home Affairs Committee saying that actually a very significant number of those coming now actually come from Albania, which isn't a country that's renowned for persecuting groups of its own nationals on grounds of religion or political opinion, perhaps like Syria or Afghanistan maybe. So I think that's a different killer fish, really. And we've had this before. When I was in the UK Border Agency, we had something which was actually called a detained fast track process, which meant that those people that were identified by triage on arrival, so they'd have to be brought ashore, looked after, make sure they're well, all of those things that we're obliged to do under the safety and law of the sea are done very, very quickly by highly trained officers, but they don't necessarily get sent on into a hotel or inland even. They would be put in a purpose-built facility. Detained in a facility.
That's the key word, isn't it?
Yes, because we do have powers to detain illegal entrants. They are illegal entrants. A lot of lawyers will be watching this arguing about the word illegal. But there is such a thing as illegal entry, and there is a power vested in the Immigration Act 71 to detain illegal entrants, provided you've got an eye on removal, Nigel. You must be able to show there's a realistic prospect of removal. My contention that in those cases there probably is, because I think the asylum application, if it's made, is unfounded and can be proved to be unfounded quite quickly. There are other issues. Many are claiming to be victims of human trafficking. I think if the right resources are put in there, but what you need to do is put your enforcement officers, your Border Force officers, your casework officers, all right there 24/7 in that facility. So this can be dealt with really, really quickly. Even an appeals court, if you need one.
That all makes sense, Tony, to me. But, 1971, since then, we've had the Human Rights Act, which, of course, incorporated within it the European Convention on Human Rights and various declarations of the United Nations. We also had the Modern Slavery Act, which I think the Tories are now beginning to regret having passed. Is it possible to do these things? Is it possible to deport people who've entered the country illegally in the eyes of Border Force, as you did in your day? Is it possible to do it, all the while the Human Rights Act's in place?
Well, this has been the problem, has been this kind of judicial overreach of articles, international articles like the Convention on Human Rights, which, as you say, is now incorporated into domestic legislation, human slavery laws. These are all well-intentioned laws to protect us, ourselves, our own human rights, and ourselves not being victims. But I think they've gone too far, Nigel. They've now actually opened the door to the kingdom. And essentially, well, all you've got to do is make a claim under these articles. So I think there is a case for changing the law. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know whether we actually completely demur from the convention or not, but I would want really good lawyers. If I was Suella Braverman, I'd be bringing in the very, very best lawyers.
I mean, David Davis argues that in Sweden, they can deal with this, but of course it all depends on the judges. And I don't think the judges have ever been on the side of border force, have they?
Well, the judgments that have been brought over the years, they were actually, Nigel, back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, we were empowered to do all kinds of things by the courts in terms of determining what an illegal entrant was. You could be an illegal entrant after seeing an officer if you produced a false passport or if you told lies. Then that was all interpreted by the courts as being power to us to detain and remove. So it hasn't always been like that, but I think that there's been this last 20 years what we call successive judgments in Europe about the rights of individuals to go to another country, to claim human rights, to claim asylum. All of that has absolutely swamped the caseworkers in the homes. They can't cope with it because they're faced with so many pressures that how are you going to get a case to conclusion, let alone onto an aircraft? It's a huge, huge effort. So they've got to match that effort. They've got to put in caseworkers, enforcement officers, good lawyers, and really invest. But it can be done, Nigel. It's been done before.
Looking ahead to 2023, and we've seen 8,000 in a year of 2020 become 28,000 in a year in 2021. We're just shy of 45,000 for this year. It'll be 50 by the end of the year if we get some calm weather. I've no doubt about that. And we head towards next year. The government repeatedly talking tough, delivering nothing. Worth reminding everybody that those that come across the channel, in nearly every case, have already crossed the Mediterranean. And I fought against that EU policy back in 2015. I know you did. I thought it was a mistake. Just bring us up to speed. What's been happening in the Mediterranean in the last few months? Well,
Frontex, the European Border Agency, just released new figures today, Nigel, to show 68% increase on last year, over 300,000 now illegal entries detected at the external border. They're in the same situation. That's detected, but they're admitted into the EU. A significant number are crossing the borderless Schengen zone, heading up towards Calais. If the signal is still sent to migrants in the EU and outside, and traffickers in the EU and outside, that the doors are open, more will come, unless we can start showing real deterrent. And the only way to show a real deterrent, in my experience, I've been doing this for a long time, Nigel, is to start returning people, demonstrating to people. Even the Archbishop said, look, there's only so many we can take. If that's true, then there's some that we can't take. We need to focus on them, not just in terms of refusals, but removals. And, the media needs to be out there covering people being sent back. That needs to go on TikTok. That needs to go on Facebook. When people start waking up to the fact that this is a waste of time, why am I paying €5,000 to someone to nearly drown in the English Channel in freezing temperatures, and then I'm back in Tirana next week? It's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it?
That's how you break the model.
That's how you break it,
Tony Smith, thank you very much indeed.